interact with intellectuals and thought leaders in this country. So, in a departure from our usual format, today we have a kind of panel discussion with two of our distinguished guests, Mr. Abhinav Prakash Singh and Mr. Aasheerwad Dwivedi. Both are assistant professors of economics in the Sriram College of Commerce. Abhinav's research interests include private public infrastructure, public-private partnerships, infrastructure, so and so. Mr. Aasheerwad's expertise lie in econometrics, Indian economy, and economic geography. I hope I can correct me if I am missing out something. You also might know them from their numerous columns, especially Abhinav's, in newspapers, periodicals. So he's one of the influencers of this country. The topic for the discussion today is the economy after the deluge. As you know, after like the COVID has come as it is just what we lawyers give as an example of act of God, something so unforeseeable, so sudden, and so devastating for our economy that after that we might have to rethink many of the set certainties that we have listed. And so today we are going to talk about what would happen to our economy, like how are we doing about COVID, and what would happen to us after the COVID, right? So I would straight away give the floor to our panelists. So Avinav and Aasheerwad, this is both to you. That there has been a diverse report on the performance of the Indian economy in recent times. It seems so. The Ministry of Statistics report came that first quarter there was a economy shrunk by around 23%, and then thereafter there has been multiple reports from Fitch Ratings, Goldman Sachs, and our own estimate, which says that the economy is shrinking. And these reports widely vary from each other. So let me begin with a question that what would you, and now we have also various kinds of narratives, like recently I read somewhere that Indian per head, Indian per capita GDP is now going behind that of Bangladesh also. So behind this cobweb of information, what is the true and fair picture of Indian economy, both absolute terms and relative to other countries of the world? Yes. Yes, Abhinav, you can go first.
Thank you, Sivajyoti, for inviting me to this discussion. As you rightly pointed out, that all the reports are basically pointing out that the condition of Indian economy is not really very good. And I tend to agree with that because remember, our economy was slowing down even before the pandemic, and we were somehow stuck in that 4-5% or 3-4% economic growth rate. And now with the pandemic and the a very long lockdown, and also because of the disruption of the global supply chains, what has happened that the old economic structures and the old economic certainties have broken down, and that is showing up in this kind of numbers which we are seeing in our data. But the problem, Survajyoti, is that this pandemic is simply showing India the mirror. I'm sorry, there's lots of disturbance, Survajyoti, for somehow. Okay, so this pandemic has simply shown us the mirror that all our bravado, that all this hooray of India, that great Indian middle class is rising, and India is going to become a great power, a superpower in the coming years. The pandemic has shown us the mirror that, see, you stand on a very weak foundation. And in India, especially, we have failed in the last 70 years to simply industrialize our economy. And that is something unimaginable. That is also somehow unbelievable that how we have failed it. We failed the bus in the 1960s. Again, we failed the bus in the 80s and the 90s. And by our policies in the last 10 years, we are again going down the same path. Somehow we do not realize in this country that the only way out for India is to become an industrial power. But somehow in this country, because of the old baggage and old political baggage of Gandhian thought, and also of what you call Indic thought or the Bharati Sanskriti, we somehow romanticize the villages. We somehow romanticize that low level of existence, and we somehow have this hostility towards the big industry, big corporates, and the industrialization and urbanization especially, we have not even understood or realized that that's the only way to go forward. So what the progress we have made in the last, let's say 20, 30 years in this country, I would say, I will use the phrase by Shankaraya, that accidental India, that everything happens in India because of an accident. You're jumping from crisis to crisis. So economic reforms happened because there was a crisis then. Our green revolution happened because the government was forced to initiate those policies because we were in a very bad condition in the 60s. There were back-to-back famines, there were wars, there were lots of conditionalities by the Soviet Union and the America to give the food aid. So we were forced to do the Green Revolution. Otherwise, you remember in the first 15 years of our independence, we were not really focusing on the agriculture in the 5-year plan. And then again, today you see, it's because of the crisis, we are being forced to do so many reforms. In the last 2-3 months, I would say we have done so much of reforms that I would call it the India's second 1991 movement. But remember, these reforms could have been done in 2014 and 2015 itself. We waited for it. So this is the problem in Indian policy making, and this goes beyond any political party ruling in the center. This is a kind of a, I'll say a socio-political characteristic of India, that we only do something when we push to it. I think your students will also agree. They study only when there's exam next day. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about out here. So yes, the pandemic has shown us the mirror that all your big talks were for nothing. And India is not going to become a superpower in the near future. India is not even going to become a great power in the near future. I'm very sure about it. You look at the basic numbers out here. The Bangladesh per capita GDP is higher than you. It was even the Bangladesh per capita GDP has been higher than the GDP of the neighboring states. All the northeastern states, including Bengal, had the lower per capita GDP than the Bangladesh for quite some time now. So it's not nothing surprising. It's not nothing which is new, or it is not something which is very surprising. So our per capita incomes are very low in this country. Our state capacity in India is very low. The successive governments in India have somehow kind of hostility towards building a state in India. So you see, look at the recent numbers in the parliament, 1 million school teacher posts are lying vacant. 30% of the vacancies in the agriculture and the rural ministry are lying vacant. So Indian state does not even have the capacity to do the things on the ground. And we somehow think that we can launch great schemes and implement them successfully. Our bureaucrats are master of all trade. They can do everything. A small number of bureaucrats running the show basically because of discretionary powers in their hand. So I think we have got a good reality check, especially during the pandemic when 4,000 rules were made in 4 months. So we should really get serious about reforming our bureaucracy and reforming our state capacity. But I would say the situation is not good, and let's not hide away from it. And let's see how the discussion goes forward. We will elaborate on these points as we go forward.
Thank you, Abhinav. So, Aasheerwad, do you have something to add to this? Where are we if in the relative terms, just with respect to this COVID problem, like we are not doing well. I mean, we have wasted 10 years of our life. Let's face that. And then we have essentially started again in 2014. And then the point is, if I take out all these and just focus for the moment. So in relative terms, why do we stand? So, Aasheerwad, what do you say?
Abhinav gave a very good macro picture. So, in the broader term, a lot of things that he says, I totally agree to. In the context of the GDP number and how are we doing in comparative terms? I would like to just point out 2-3 microeconomic issues specifically to the GDP number. Okay. So one thing, the thing that you said in the introduction, that we have a negative 24% fall of GDP in the Q1. We must remember that Indian economy is largely an informal economy. So, and by definition, informal economy, you cannot have good statistics. So most of the numbers related to informal sector is done on the basis of approximation, which is basically based on past data and some kind of a linear projection from the past. You kind of assume that future will be as past was. And that's why these numbers should be, seen with that context, that maybe in reality, the numbers are even worse than what we are seeing right now. That is one thing. The second thing is that in the second quarter, like these days, we have some good news in terms of economy recovering and doing good and all. In that context, also, I want to point out that this is also should be seen with some kind of a understanding that this is some kind of a pent up demand which is working. So, if you had a very severe lockdown, I would say the most severe lockdown in the whole world. So that's why, when you are in a lockdown, there is only some, up till a point that you can eat. So everything that you wanted to buy in those days, there is, because of that pent up demand, there is some kind of spending that we can see. So we should definitely keep this in mind, that in the coming days, once this pent-up demand goes down, in quarter 3, things can be even worse. Okay, that is more or less about the GDP number that I want to point out specifically for the students. Okay, that they should read it like this. In the global context, apart from what Abhinav said in context of Bangladesh, one policy issue I want to highlight here, and that is a huge problem with the current government, according to me. See, if you see the European Union and Western European countries, and even are even now changing their stance from monetary dominance to fiscal dominance. They are accepting this fact that this is not a time where monetary policy only can work. It's like theoretically, in terms of data, in terms of anyone experienced economist, everyone agrees on that in the times that we are living, we need very active fiscal intervention. Monetary policy alone can't do it. There are people who believe that monetary policy alone, monetary policy will not work largely. So we must intervene through fiscal policy, and that is the only thing that will bring us, will bring us out of this whole thing. And in that context, there is something, again, this is specifically for the students. See, fiscal deficit numbers are hyped a lot, and fiscal deficit numbers are always, if as a proportion to your GDP. So there are two ways in which we can see that. You don't spend, you manage your numerator, your GDP remains, but in the future, if you don't spend, as your denominator falls, your GDP shrinks, your fiscal deficit automatically is going to, be very, very large. The second option is to spend, your numerator increases, but when you will spend, your GDP will also increase, so your fiscal deficit will not look as bad in the future. So, there is definitely some kind of policy making in this direction through direct fiscal intervention that is required. Now, how can this be done? Immediately, what government could have done was, direct benefit transfer into Jan Dhan accounts. According to me, 500 was very less amount. It can be, something more. But I think on that side, we have already been very late. So the other thing that the government can do is basically, spend on, let's say, direct spending on rural infrastructure. That is one thing that, or health infrastructure, where we are very bad. Our finance minister said that all the budgeted projects will be front loaded, but I don't see very, maybe because of bureaucratic hurdles, we have not yet acted on that. So if we don't do that right now, taking into account our fiscal deficit, our GDP is going to shrink for sure, and fiscal deficit will automatically blow up. So there is that's in comparative terms, we must now start acting on fiscal front as other countries are doing. Now, directly in the addressing the comparative thing. See, according to my understanding, this should be done keeping into account how severe lockdowns were. So if you do this analysis, so there is some kind of a mobility index that Google provides. So if you map that, so if you take, let's say, 150 countries and see how severe lockdown was and how much GDP has declined, you will find that India will be above the line. So India is one of those countries where, in comparison to severity of the lockdown, the fall in GDP is higher. So I would, and I'm saying this keeping in mind the informal sector bit that I said in the beginning. So because we were already, see, remember, it's not that the GDP has fallen recently. We were, as Abhinav said, we were doing before, before the COVID crisis also. It's not that GDP was very, very, good. So in that sense, I would say that we are not very comfortable if you compare India with the rest of the world. And I think this is it. That this is what I want to highlight. And one more, just last point. This is again just for the students. Quarter 4, that is January to March. I'm telling you today only, the numbers will be very high. You will find the growth rate, in the pods maybe much better than Q1, Q2, and Q3. But that will happen because the last year Q4 was very bad, and you calculate GDP quarter to quarter, year on year basis. So because of low base effect, the Q4 will be automatically very high. But once, when you're reading out the GDP numbers, it's very important to see it in all these, taking into account all these things. Then only the real scenario of the economy comes out, which is not very rosy right now.
Okay, so thanks, Aasheerwad. I would come back to this question of fiscal deficit and the stimulus slightly, but before that, just one cross question to you. You talked about the lockdown. The Indian lockdown has been criticized by a lot of people, including recently by Joseph Stiglitz. Do you think, I mean, as an economist, it's a both question is actually to both of you. Do you think, as an economist, the cost of the lockdown actually overweighs the benefit? Because there are countries like Pakistan which actually didn't do much of a lockdown, and then there are countries like US which basically had a localized lockdown. Do you think that kind of approach is going to have been, well, at least in economic terms, less harmful?
May I go, Abhinav, or you? I see. According to me, whatever Stiglitz said, and people who are criticizing lockdown, I don't agree to that. Lockdown was necessary, and remember, it's very clear that lockdown is not the solution to coronavirus. Everyone understood that. It was basically to prepare yourself to tackle huge numbers and to basically, delay the peak. Everyone understands that. And if you see our number, the amount of masks that we are producing, the number of PPE kit we are producing, we have successfully done that. According to me, there is something we are missing when people criticize lockdown and they relate it to economic outcome. See, what happened was, once the nationwide lockdown was lifted, state governments very funnily came up with random lockdowns, like a lockdown on Saturday, a lockdown on Friday. I absolutely cannot find a logic of that, and in my understanding, those things have hampered economy more than the nationwide lockdown, and for the following reason. See, once the nationwide lockdown was done, obviously you will have minimum economic activity, but everyone knew this is going to happen. Once that was lifted, people expected some kind of certainty. But what state governments did was, by these random lockdowns, weekend lockdowns kind of thing, they fueled in uncertainty. In an uncertain world, people like to save more than spending. Everyone's tendency is that, because you don't know, even if you are a producer or a consumer, you are absolutely uncertain about what's going to happen tomorrow. So your tendency is to keep yourself safe, do bare minimum, don't invest anywhere, don't, buy a lot of things, because you never know what's going to happen. And that has basically, I think, caused more damage to the economy than the nationwide lockdown. Nationwide lockdown, if anyone says is not, has created more damage, I absolutely disagree to that. It was necessity. Otherwise, so many people have died that, the same people would have told you today that why didn't we do lockdown? So it's like that. But after the lockdown was lifted, state government acted very, funnily, according to me, and that created a huge problem in terms of economy.
Okay, so Abhinav, would you fundamentally agree with this? And also, I have a question particular to something you wrote, I believe in print or somewhere, that the migrant crisis, as in a way, it has, I mean, it is something which is related to the lockdown, that it has fundamentally damaged the socio-economic mobility that is built up over maybe past decade.
True.
So do you think that, I mean, in that light, how would you assess the lockdown? And do you think that something has permanently snapped? For example, this migrant networks have been permanently damaged, or it's just a matter of time? People just things just go back where it was.
Yes, I agree with Aasheerwad when he's saying that lockdown was necessary. So, of course, today we are sitting here and discussing what happened in the past. So we have the benefit of the hindsight that virus was perhaps not as deadly in India, the strain of virus we have as compared to, let's say, in the Europe. Maybe because we have more immunity, we don't know what is the reason. But the point is that we have not seen that number of deaths. But now that's a benefit of the hindsight. In March or in April, we had no way of knowing how the things will unfold in the future. So as a precaution, the government did the lockdown, and which I think was a good step. The problem started after that. The problem started when you started running a bureaucratic sarkar, when you empowered the bureaucrats to do your random things. The bureaucrats are not politicians. They're not supposed to take political decisions. And they are going to, once you give Indian bureaucracy, we all know how efficient it is. Once you give them power, so they got lots of power to create nuisance. And they did that. You talk to anyone in any city, the police has been pointed out as the most corrupt institution during the lockdown. The bureaucrats, the SDMs making random rules, they were bringing out notifications which are so confusing, no one can even understand the head and tail of it. So then the home ministry, the minister had to take a call and force them to issue a simplified notification and all. So the problem started there. Once the bureaucrats got power in their hand, and perhaps too much of power, arbitrariness started. And that created lots of uncertainty, that who can travel, what passes are needed. You need 10 different kinds of passes, even if you are a delivery boy at, let's say, Big Bazaar or Godrej Nature's Basket or something. So other thing which happened is because of how the state governments were dealing with it. As Aasheerwad just pointed it out, they created even more uncertainty. Look at Maharashtra, we still have lots of uncertainty in let's say, the financial capital of India. We just don't know what the government policy is. The other point is about the migrant crisis, the article you're talking about. Yes, this is what is happening. See, in India, remember, we are a very poor country. So India, this is why I say India is not going to become a superpower in the near future. We are a very poor country. Our per capita incomes are extremely low, and large number of people are also very poor, more poor than we tend to think of them as poor. In fact, you talk to everyone says they are middle class. So their self-perception is of the middle class, but the size of middle class is actually very small. It's not 30 crore. I think it's hardly 10 crore. Maybe, or there's no proper estimate of the middle class in India. Now, the socioeconomic mobility of these people, and especially from the countryside, came basically from two factors. One was the government jobs, the public sector jobs, right? They were the mainstay of the employment in India for a very long time. When I'm talking about jobs, I'm talking about well-paid, stable jobs. Otherwise, everyone is doing some or the other kind of job and everyone is surviving. The problem in India is not necessarily of the jobs, it's necessarily of a well-paid job, right? A decent job, a stable job. And second was the migration to the urban centers. So the people used to migrate from the villages because there's nothing to do in the villages. So all your Gram Swaraj and Indic model and Bharatiya Sanskriti model doesn't work because majority of the people in the villages do not have any assets, they do not have land. So they have no option but to come to the cities and work in the factories, maybe in the small businesses, constructions, and different kinds of activities. Now, once both of these pillars are shaken, and as it has been happening, the government jobs have been going down for the last 20, 25 years. It's nothing new under this government. And then with the pandemic, the reverse migration happened. So just in a moment, we broke the entire process of socioeconomic mobility. We just destroyed the gains which they had made over the decades. But these people who will go back to the villages, what they will do? There's nothing to do in the villages. Despite all you talk about encouraging village economy and local economy and Atmanirbharta, there's frankly nothing to do in the villages. And the population burden is so high, it is going to lead lots of social strife, caste conflicts, which are going to revive, which we're seeing as well. The Hathras is a good example, not directly linked to the migration, but I think the sense of despair is playing somewhere on the minds of every caste, not just let's say the Valmikis, but also of the. But I don't think it is going to be permanent, because we are seeing that as the economy will revive, they will come back to the cities, because frankly they have nowhere else to go. But it has damaged a lot. The social fabric has been damaged. The political capital of the ruling party has been damaged because of this. And I think they should do some course correction. Especially, they should start filling up the vacant post in the government services. They should start expanding the government services. See, Surbhajyoti, in India, we have a very deep perversion in the public discourse. When we talk about reforms, we only mean retreat of the state. But remember, the state in India is essentially a ghost state. It does not exist for the masses. The presence of state at the local level is only because of police, and also because of district magistrate, the coercive power of the state. The bureaucracy, the judiciary doesn't work. The police doesn't work. The welfare bureaucracy doesn't work. The people and the interaction between the people and the state is very limited. So India is already a wonderland of libertarian state. The state is so small in actual size, right? And still you say we want to reduce the number, we want to reduce the size of the state even more. The problem is not the number of the bureaucrats or number of the public servants in India. The problem is the bad laws, bad institutions, and arbitrary power in the hands of the bureaucrats, which gives the impression that the government is oversized and the government has too much of power in its hand. America has more number of public employment per capita than India. I think the number of bureaucrats in America is higher than the number of bureaucrats in India, and that's a free market economy. So we need to fix the state capacity, and also historically, Survajyoti, India has never had a proper state. The Turkish state, the Delhi Sultanate, was a military occupation. The Mughal state was an extractive state where more than 40% GDP accrued to the Mughal court, and nothing was left for the masses. So Mughals built great monuments and great buildings, but there is no public work of note under the Mughal Empire. And the British state, we all know, they were least interested in governing beyond certain point. And even after independence, our state is very limited, very weak, and very small. So we need to focus and strengthen on the state capacity, because remember, the industrialization, which we keep talking about, is a very complex process. Industrialization is not just about building some random factories here and there, like Nehruvian policies tried to do. Industrialization is about socio-economic transformation of the entire society. And as the facts show us, and as the history of the other countries show us, it's a very violent process as well. It's a very disruptive, chaotic, and violent process. So you need a very powerful state to manage it. And unfortunately, in India, we don't have it as of yet. So I think this is what we need to focus on going forward. Surbhajyoti, migrant crisis has caused deep damage, no doubt about it, but that will recover because reverse migration. They're already coming back to the cities. But we need to manage this process going forward in a more planned manner. It can't be the random India grows at night kind of a thing. The state needs to assert itself, need to build the capacity to guide and manage this process of transformation from a village economy to an urban-based economy.
Okay, so that's very enlightening. And but Abhinav, the point that you make about expanding state employment, I mean, if I look into the discourse, I mean, on the right, I don't see that as the discourse. In fact, right now, what I see is the state governments unable to pay their employees. You have in Delhi, the people who are managing the COVID itself have not been paid. And West Bengal, I mean, Mamata has withheld payment for even pensioners for a very long time. I mean, this is the state that the state governments are in. And the only discourse I have seen coming from left is that you supersize the Narega, you expand the Narega, you go on expanding it. So why do you see this coming from? I mean, this doesn't seem to be anybody's concern right now. So why do you think that we can bring this in?
Well, because in India, the problem is that left and right in the traditional European sense do not matter, right? What matters in India, the central ideological debate in India, I would say, is about the role of the state and the nature of the state. It's not about less state or more state. So lots of people who get educated like us, in the modern university system and who have exposure to the Western political thought, so we tend to adopt one of them, right? So some adopt that Marxism kind of thing, others adopt this libertarian kind of a thing. Both of them, I would say, are not really relevant for India. I would not say completely irrelevant, but not really relevant for India. So in India, the ideology is, if you look at the political history of India, is always about how much the state should intervene. And there are two things about it. Some people might say, especially coming from the urban class, that we do not want more state, the well-to-do section, but they are being hypocritical because they forget that they are where they are because of the state support in the history. So it's the historical state support. The state has always supported what you call the upper classes and upper castes of India over the past several hundred years. So that is why you are there, right? So you have used the state, but you do not want the state to be available to the other people. Now, you see the entire movements of the subaltern caste, whether it's the Dalit caste or the EBC caste or even the Pasmanda Muslims nowadays. What is the entire movement arguing about? It is not saying that we do not want state. They're saying we want to become visible to the state. We want state to intervene in our daily life. We want state to shield us. They want state to do something about their harsh realities so as to mitigate their conditions, the bad living conditions, and so on. Now, the this is the central political debate we see in India, but in the intellectual discourse in India, because it's so detached from the realities of all in the air, right? Whether it's the left or the right, it's like we're just talking over each other. We are not really addressing the central points on the ground. So I think if you go on the ground, that is the main concern. When people think job in this country, they really mean government job to a large extent. They not even mean government job, they mean a stable job. And in India, our manufacturing has not done really well over the last couple of decades. In fact, it has never done well over the last century. So we do not have that middle income jobs in this country. So only government jobs are left. Rest of the private jobs are too small in number. They are out of reach for the most of the people. And this thing about telling people to become entrepreneur, right? This doesn't work in a country like India. Why? Because entrepreneurship works where you have certain amount of social security. That is when you can take some risk. In a country like India, there's no state presence, there's no state support, there's not even basic health facilities available for you. Who's going to take the risk to become an entrepreneur? Except from the people who are coming from that family or that community who have that social capital and network. Only they can do this. Masses can't do it. There might be exceptional cases here and there, but it can't be our overall transformation. So we need to understand the reality of the India and then position our intellectual discourse and all. So I say conservatism in India is not the conservatism of the West. We can't afford that. We cannot be anti-state. We can also not be, asking for the defense of the status quo. Right? The conservative party in India has to argue for social change and social transformation.
So thanks, Abhinav, for that. So let me directly come back to the point that we were discussing. It's about the damage and how to fix the damage in the immediate term. So let's move on to the stimulus. So when we are talking about stimulus now, we are talking about really large figures. So US, I suppose they are still trying to negotiate a stimulus somewhere between 1.8 trillion to 2.2 trillion USD. Germany has given a disproportionate stimulus of 1.47 trillion USD. The Indian one is also quite large. At the face of it, it's around, should be around 260 billion. How much is 20 lakhs crore? I mean, I always get confused in this lakh, crores, and billions business. But then again, it has been criticized as largely being, as being not enough because only 2% of this is actually direct support. Rest of it is like credit guarantees and loans. So is there scope for more? So as a macroeconomist, what do you think of the stimulus, Aasheerwad?
The stimulus, as you rightly said, I think you summarized it very well. The problem with the stimulus is that a large part of it is giving you, they are making credit easily available to you. So they are saying that you borrow, and we will definitely make borrowing simpler by lowering the rate of interest. But the problem is that in the face of uncertainty, people don't like to borrow. Like nobody would like to borrow, and seeing the condition of the banking system in India, considering NPAs and the whole hue and cry about people running out of the country after taking so much of loan, even the bank administration are very, very, risk averse. They don't want to give loan, and people don't want to take loan. That is very, very clear. So in these times, just creating a package around this thought that we will make a credit very easy to people is not the right way to think. And if you see the numbers, even after all this attempt by the government to improve, credit number is not growing. It is if you compare it with last year, it's not growing. It is simply because people don't want to take loan. Because see, if I take a loan, I in a situation of boom where the future seems rosy, I would take a businessman will take loan even at a higher rate of interest, because the important thing about loan is not the rate of interest but the ability to repay it. So even if you are willing to give me a loan at a very small rate of interest, but I know I have nowhere to invest and I think I'll not be able to recover my principal, I am not going to take loan. So the problem with the Indian stimulus is basically that there are a lot of ways to give easy loan, but just that people don't want to take loan, so it's not going to work. There has to be some direct intervention.
So, Abhinav, what did you think about the stimulus? And also, I wish to ask you, like, would you agree to this Mr. Manmohan Singh's, Dr. Manmohan Singh's suggestion that we actually start borrowing from the IMF and the World Bank to finance the stimulus? Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I agree with Aasheerwad regarding the stimulus that the kind of packages we have given is basically they're basically aimed at enabling the liquidity flow, the ease of liquidity in the manufacturing sector. But they're not really going to borrow it. So I know many people, I mean, anecdotal evidence is not the data, but who are into business and they have got credit limits from the banks, but they're not investing anything. They're holding on to all their money because they're saying there's no demand in the market. From whom are we going to borrow and produce, right? So it's, on the one side, it's really an income crisis in this country. There's no aggregate demand as such. The other point is about uncertainty is also very true. So as of now, we just don't know what will happen tomorrow. No one knows what the government is going to come up tomorrow as a policy. They might do some other thing. There are lots of rumors. People keep talking about a second lockdown coming after winters, because in winters the cases might go up and all. The other point is about the uncertainty caused by the judiciary in this country. The judiciary is the elephant in the room in this country. No one talks about, right? From canceling coal block allocation to deciding on spectrum to deciding on the standards of the cars to deciding on everything in this country is being done by the judiciary. Now, that causes the judicial intervention have caused, I'd say, very high economic damages to this country. Perhaps someone should research on it. I think numbers will be staggering, much more than the lockdown, much more than the other cases. But coming to stimulus, I fully agree that the government should do direct spending. One reason why the government has not been doing spending is because we are too much beholden to this credit rating agencies. हमारा downgrade हो जाएगा, हमारी credit rating agencies downgrade कर देंगे if you spend too much. But that's a very weak argument, because these agencies, how they rank people and how they rank companies and the countries, it has no logic at all. It's all about lobbying. It's all about faulty models. They matter faulty. They never predict anything right. All their predictions in the past have been off the mark, right? Just before the Enron went bankrupt, they were giving it AAA or AA rating, and next month Enron went bankrupt. So we should not be bothering about what the rating agencies will see. But unfortunately, that has somehow caught the imagination of the politicians in this country for a very long time, that we have to be in the top of the international rating agencies and rankings and all. We shouldn't care about it. We should go ahead and start spending money. Manmohan Singh's argument about borrowing from IMF and all, perhaps, I think that's it's not easy to borrow because it comes attached with lots of conditionalities, even for a country like India, right? May not be, the conditionalities may not be like they were in the 90s, early 90s or 80s, but still, perhaps we can if we need to be, but I think we can easily increase our fiscal deficit and do it, right? What exactly are we doing? Because are we saving the fiscal space for the war with China in the coming months? I don't know. But I think we have enough fiscal space to do it. And if not now, then when? Right? If not now, then when are we going to run high fiscal deficit?
Okay, so what Mr. Udit Jain is asking if the insolvency laws are actually complicating the matter, like when we're talking about banks not borrowing. So is the IBC is somehow a positive factor?
Yes, IBC is a very great reform which has been done. One of the best things this government has done. Remember, in India, it was always easy to enter the market after economic reforms. Before economic reforms, it was easy to enter the market, it was easy to leave the market. But after economic reforms, it was easier to enter the market, but exit was still very weak. So if you have certain companies, now see, when you're having business, when you're having industries, the businesses and industries will go bankrupt, right? This is a part and parcel of the business that for some years you perform well, maybe some other 5 years you might be stressed, maybe you will default, maybe you will start failing. So there has to be a proper system of winding up the sick industries or the bankrupt industries. Going bankrupt is not a crime. You just failed at a business, that's it. It should not be seen as a crime as we assume in India. So now with the IBC, for the first time, we had that kind of process so that the people who had loaned to these companies, they can recover whatever they can. Because otherwise, earlier it used to take 10 years, 15 years, 25 years to wind up a country, an industry. The matter is complicated because, again, because of the judiciary, right? So IBC tribunal is giving one judgment, then people are going to the judiciary and judiciary is doing something else. So this process is getting dragged on again, right? So perhaps we need to create an institution that the judgment or the decision by the tribunals are going to be final and they cannot be entertained by the judiciary anymore. And of course, there might be some small things, fine tunings are required, but that's true for any law, Subhajyoti. No law can be perfect. So you implement a law, then you keep on fine tuning the law as you go along.
Okay, and like coming back, there seems to be a theory gaining ground that the stimulus is smaller because the state expects either a war with China or very high cost of COVID vaccination. I think there was an article in Swarajya to that effect. So do you think that's a credible theory?
Well, we don't know, frankly, right? So perhaps, we are saving up for, there are actually three theories that perhaps is the possibility of war in the near future. Other thing is the possibility of the mega, health expenditure in the next year. Or some are saying that the government is simply saving up the fiscal space to come up with an even bigger fiscal stimulus in the future. But they're all, speculations and theories. We don't know. We do not have insider information. No one has in this government, right? So,
okay. So Aasheerwad, yeah. So Abhinav, there's another, like when we are talking about the stimulus and the fiscal space, so there is another right idea, I would say, that's what I can say, that to force the states into reform by using the GST compensation, right? So now, of course, I mean, there was a lot of Pichatani, but finally, I just read yesterday, I think the union has agreed to borrow 1.1 lakh crores and on lent to the states, right? So, do you think that, I mean, of course, I just, like what Abhinav just said, that for a moment, you just stop fretting about the FRBM Act, the fiscal deficit and all these things should keep happening. Just save yourself right now. So do you think it's a good idea to borrow like this? And do you think this can be used to force the states into reform? Do you think that's a credible idea?
See, you have to see this whole thing in the context of why this borrowing is being done. So this is being done basically because government has to pay compensation cess to the state government, which was promised to them, and the central government must do that. Otherwise, there is some kind of deficit of trust between state and the center, which is bad. So in that context, the decision of central government borrowing is absolutely right. But in my sense, the way they are doing it is they are borrowing and then they are lending to the states. So basically, instead of that, according to me, if they borrow and transfer, it's a better way to do that. Because see, GST is, it's not yet settled in our country. There are a lot of issues with GST, and the only way where I can see GST working very properly in the future is cooperation between state and the center. I think in Indian history, GST is one of the best example where this cooperation was somehow brought in, and it should not be disturbed. And if things like this keeps happening, then there is a problem. So I think center is right in that sense that they are borrowing and they are lending. Instead of that, according to me, they should have transferred. According to me, where states are wrong is, see, in times where revenues are falling, you cannot demand the same level of compensation cess which was calculated in the past according to some projection of revenues. There they are wrong. So I think central government has come halfway, states should also come halfway, and they should they should demand amount which is slightly less, taking into account the shortfall in the revenues. So if they are able to do that, it will be again a very great example of cooperation, which is required. Because see, after the nationwide lockdown, as I said earlier, a lot of things are being done at the level of state. So in that sense, I think it's a good thing. Specifically related to FRBM Act, I always say that FRBM Act is just, what do I say? It's just an act. You can't mortgage the future of your economy because of FRBM law. And like what Abhinav was saying right now, and when you were discussing about different theories of why government is saving up. See, this nobody knows, as you guys said. But there is also a time to act. You cannot keep waiting for a very long time. Maybe we'll miss the train. It will be really problematic then. So I think not that big bang direct spending, but some spending must be done during this 1-2 months, keeping into account Diwali and everything. It might have some multiplier effect. So I don't think FRBM is important at all, specifically in this time.
Like when your back is in the fire, first save yourself, forget about the formalities. I will think about it later. Right now, I mean, this is a crisis which is really unprecedented. I don't believe even 1918, what happened is a guide, because 1918, it seems that there was a huge number of deaths, but the economic effect was not this pronounced. So this is really something completely unprecedented in history, and we must be willing to work outside our frameworks to come at an optimum outcome. Regarding GST, I mean, tell me if you agree with me. GST, it seems to me, it started out as an agreement between the state and the center and various political parties. But now the states have taken the view it's entirely the center's responsibility. They would not cut any expenditure, including absolutely useless expenditure like giving money to pujas or local clubs or whatever that they do. And the whole thing has to be given to them by the center. The state of West Bengal, where I currently sit, of course, seems to be leader of this movement. But what do you think would be then the future of the GST? Do you think it is something which can be fixed? It seems to me that the Indian opposition parties have walked away from see GST as something negotiable. They are now hardening their stance. Would you agree with me on this? Yes, sir. Aasheerwad.
Yeah, so see, I think GST can be worked out definitely, and I think it is necessary for the government to do that. It's a good reform. It is going to integrate the economy under one tax umbrella. It's very important to for a well functioning economy. Now see the political concept. See, I'll tell you there are to these things there are bureaucratic solutions, like in this compensation case also earlier what government was trying to do was a bureaucratic solution, and then there are political solution to the problem. I think there should be a political solution to that, where state government and center government should come on board, and maybe regarding to the wasteful expenditure and all, government maybe in return to some higher transfer from the center, they can demand some kind of a regulation on the state governments. But there is only so much that you can do. It has to be political cooperation. Without that, this reform, according to me, cannot work at all. And right now what we are seeing is something counter to that. It's not if it's not just this time. In 2017-18 and 2018-19 also, there are some small incidents where some kind of trust deficit was there between state and center. So I think it can be worked, but the solution has to be political, not bureaucratic. Government, political parties has to agree to some kind of cooperation.
Okay. So, what did you say to that, Abhinav? Would you agree with him?
I fully agree to what Aasheerwad has just said. We should stop thinking that the problems we are facing are technocratic or bureaucratic in nature. They are political in nature, right? We cannot have a system in which political actors are disempowered. And we're seeing that not just in the in the case of economy, we are seeing that in the case of all other crises. Surajit, there's just lots of echo coming my way. I can't, really hear it properly. Okay, now it's much better. So I agree to that point that these are not the bureaucratic problems. We need to have a political deal. The center and the state need to sit down together and basically work out and chart out what they want to do in the future. Beyond that, what Aasheerwad has said is absolutely on the spot. I don't have much to add to it. The point is that I think GST is here to stay. It will continue. And this contestation will continue. This is how Indian polity has always worked. So anyone who goes, to the on the opposition bench, they oppose everything, irrespective of what, even if they have proposed those things, it will continue. But I think GST is not going anywhere. We can perhaps, see some modification in the future, but it's going to stay more or less.
So, Abhinav, you had said in the very beginning that it seems that we are once again back into 1991. But in 91, I mean, our task was easy. We knew what to do, right? It was, we were like a semi-socialist, whatever we were. But now, what would the 91 movement look like? Like, what are the reforms? What are going to be the near-term reforms which would happen, say, next 2 years?
Number one, judicial reforms, without any doubt. We need to restrain the judiciary. The powers of Supreme Court needs to be cut down. Supreme Court should be made a completely constitutional court, and it should have no power to intervene in the day-to-day legislation or working of the executive. Second point, Surajyoti, please mute yourself. Oh, now. See, because I'm unable to hear even my own voice because there's lots of echo coming my way. So judicial reform is the first thing we need to do. Second thing, we need to focus on the urban reforms, right? So this whole thing of urban center being treated as the sideway, as a leftover of the political process should go away. Remember, the economic growth rate comes from urban center. It does not come from the rural centers. And there's a reason for that. Me and Aasheerwad, in fact, wrote an article on this thing that because of the nature of economic growth rate, where you have more than 50% of growth rate coming from the technological progress, only cities can be the engine of growth, because technological progress does not take place in the kasbas and the villages. It takes place in the cities. And cities are very complex social, political, and economic constructs. So we need to do lots of urban government reform. We need to do lots of reforms at the local level, the frontline bureaucracy. That should be the second reform. The third part I would say is that we need to focus on something which lots of people on the right and the conservative side, don't like, but labor reforms alone cannot do, right? So we have been doing labor reforms. UP tried to do very radical labor reforms by repealing all the labor laws for the couple of months. That is not going to work at all. The companies will never come to a country where labor is illiterate, where labor is hungry, where labor is malnourished, where labor does not have any proper skills. So we need to invest in our people. Remember, it's all about the people. Even the technology is about the people. It's not about the machine. The human beings are the carrier of the knowledge. So you have to invest in the human capital. You need to train them. You have to provide your people social security. You have to provide them food security. If you have a good human capital, the foreign companies will also come. Your own manufacturing will also go. Forget this thing that you can have a concentration camp, a sweatshop, kind of a labor camp, where the foreign companies will come and start producing goods. No, it is not going to happen, especially today, where the production process itself has become so complex that you need more skilled labor to work on those processes. So I'd say these three reforms should form the core reform thrust in the future.
Okay, so I will just come back to the question of labor reforms. But before that, one short question. So in 91, like this reforms presuppose that that basically we are Atmanirbhar in our own economic space. But in 91, it seems that we had a very favorable external atmosphere, right? We did not have this trade war, we did not have this decoupling and all. So do you think that India is going to actually benefit from the decoupling or actually going to be hindered by the trade war? Abhijit, for example, like Abhijit Iyer Mitra came to Sanjog some time back and he said something very intriguing. He said that he does not think that decoupling is actually going to happen, but it may happen if the underlying technology itself changes. Right? For example, if we move into something like, say, 3D printed technology, something like that. So what are your views? Do you think that decoupling and the complex geopolitical scene that we have is going to actually help us or hinder us?
I think unlike 1991, we are in a far better position today. So see, our relations with the Gulf countries are extremely good. So we have our backyard covered in that way. Bangladesh is doing great on the economic front. That is a great relief. Right. So barring our Western neighbors, our northern neighbor, of course, the geopolitical situation of India is far more promising than before. The Western countries are more inclined towards India now. Forget all the democratic, the Democrats baiting India then and now, forget it. They are far more inclined towards India, and we need to take advantage of that. Remember, the Chinese growth story started when the Mao decided to break away from the Soviet Union and join the American camp, right, in the 1970s. So that was one of the reasons why the America turned a blind eye towards what Pakistan was doing in East Pakistan, because secret negotiations were happening via Pakistan between China and America. So, and that is where China got access to the American markets. With access to American markets, you have access to the Western markets, and that is where the Chinese story starts taking off. So we need to do a political deal. Of course, we need to ask something in return, but for that, India needs to ally with the Western camp. This non-alignment, this strategic autonomy thing, every country wants to be autonomous. Who doesn't? But we take it too far. Right? You take in the case of Iran. Iran is a hostile country. Iran is not a friendly country. But in India, our diplomats, our political parties, our political actors somehow make it as a litmus test for India's strategic autonomy and independence that we have to side with Iran. We should stop doing that. Take a clear side if you want to get benefit from the changed geopolitical situation. Coming to the technology point, yes, that's a great problem, great potential threat which we might be facing. Why these FDI was coming to countries like China or India to take advantage of the low labor cost in these countries. That was the main reason, right? To escape more taxation and regulation in the Western countries and to take advantage of the low labor cost in countries like India, China, Vietnam. But now once you have the fourth industrial revolution, right? If it really becomes a full-fledged transformation of the industrial process, then what incentive will they have to come to India? where if the production process become highly technological driven, capital intensive, then the best place to do manufacturing will be Germany, not India, right? Why will they come to a underdeveloped, technologically backward, unskilled labor abundant country like India? So I think that might be very damaging to India going forward. But how will that happen? I don't think we have discussed or paid attention to that. There has been no serious policy discussion in India so far, but it might happen. But remember the entire nature of the industrial process is changing. People don't realize you cannot do what you were doing in the 80s or even in the 90s. Now the production process is segmented, it's dispersed. You have value chains or the supply chains spreading across the countries, and everyone is specializing in a very niche area. So in India, which I said earlier when talking about the labor reforms, if you're not investing in the human capital in this country, then we are looking at a very bleak future, potentially looking at a very bleak future.
Yes, and I mean, talking about that, our initiatives there haven't been particularly successful. For example, Skill India. And even the national education policy, you can see, is at a part of the process, but that I believe has a like a 10-year timeline, and 10 years is like too much. It's having too long, kind of.
See, because we are not clear, Silvajyoti, about what we want to do. So there was this newly appointed Secretary of Education in Bihar. When he joined the post, he tweeted something, I remember. So he tweeted something, the education is about transferring this value, that value, best of the human knowledge to people and all. I remember I replied to him, said, let me simplify it for you. Just teach the people how to read and write and how to do basic mathematics, and that's it. So our education policy in this country is so confused. We want to do everything, and especially we should stop obsessing over this. Frankly, this what happened in history, what is written in the history books. First, focus on basic skills of the people. History will take care of itself, and the people for themselves will discover their own true history.
That's right. I mean, if people live, their history lives. If they are dead, their history. So this brings us to the connected but slightly different issue of innovation. So would you consider innovation as one of the principal policy driver post-COVID? I mean, I just saw today or maybe day before yesterday that India has come into the top 50 of the Global Innovation Index, but in that same index, China is at number 14. So what could be the policy vectors which would give incentive, which would incentivize innovation actually?
In this country, since independence, the government has always come up with this crazy idea of appropriate technology for India. And they have always tried to guide and control how the technological path unfolds in India. The government should stop doing that. Let the private sector do whatever it wants to do in the case of technology. There is no such thing as appropriate technology. Technology is technology. It comes, changes everything. So that is one thing. The other thing is that, again, it comes back to, I'm repeating it again and again, but that's the most crucial point. Invest in the people. Technology is about human beings, not about the machines. And third point, Aasheerwad has his entire PhD on the innovation, so I will let him answer this question.
Okay, so Aasheerwad, over to you.
See, one angle of my PhD is innovation. So, see, one thing that is there for sure is what, I think school education system till 12th requires revamping. It's very, very important thing. So that Abhinav has already said. So I don't want to say that again. But two things here. One, if you see the geography of innovation in India, you will find that there are, patches of innovation, like, and those are everyone knows that. If you see Bangalore, Bombay, Delhi, these are the hubs of, and I'm saying in terms of number of patents, which are like, this is a accepted metric of innovation. But the interesting thing is that if you see, if you do an econometric analysis, you will find that the spillover of knowledge in India is very crucial factor in promoting innovation. And now here it's your question is very interesting in today's context, because see, On one hand, you know innovation is important because AI and related stuff will take all your jobs if you don't do that, and the thing that you and Abhinav discussed. On the other hand, you are also talking that in the COVID times, we have seen a time where urbanization is no more important. Both the things are completely contradictory to each other. There are a lot of people, there was one article from, I don't know, somebody from Niti Aayog wrote that we should move away from cities. And urbanization is no more as important as it was because density has created a lot of problem during coronavirus. But you will find that innovation cannot happen without urbanization. So we must form some policy based on agglomeration economies where you link the innovation hubs which can be very easily identified with the satellite towns around it, and there should be mission based target based innovation things that you identify clusters, give them specific responsibility, give them some kind of security and freedom to spend, then only innovation happens. It cannot happen under strict regulation. So that kind of policy making, according to me, is important. First, identify the geography of innovation, bring innovative clusters around it, give them freedom to spend and innovate according to certain requirements.
Okay, so innovation seems to be like we can do an entire session on innovation. I'd totally love to have you with us in that. Um, that's very interesting. So our student is asking, do you think the NEP is going to help, or what do you think? Like, is it of any use here? Is it a plus or a minus or simply nothing?
Uh, See, on NEP, I think we'll have to wait and watch. See, I don't, if you see the draft, I don't think it's very promising. There should be, for example, I think there should be specifically school education need to focus on certain things in the future plus basic language and maths, which has not been emphasized. And the bigger problem that I see here is that you cannot revamp education system until and unless you are willing to spend a lot of money. The problem here is that government is not willing to do that. And if you don't do this, whatever ambition you decide to pursue, you will not be able to do that. You for some years, at least the next 10-12 years, government should decide to spend a lot of money in this sector, and in NEP I don't see that, and that according to me is the biggest problem. If you're not willing to spend, the outcomes will not be very good.
Okay, so moving on, so there are two questions. Of course, it's in everybody's mind, which is the Farm Bill and the Labor Code. So, Abhinav, do you think why did you put the Farm Bill? Is it a response to COVID, in a sense that this is one of the policy measures in response to COVID, or is it some pending reform that the state is just doing, taking the cover of the COVID? And why do you think, if it's a purely economic measure, why has it created the kind of political opposition that it has created? What is it that people find it so objectionable in it? Yes, Abhinav.
Yeah, so you're right. I don't think this is just a COVID package. I think it's a long pending reform, and we have been talking about it for at least 2 decades now. And every committee, every government has been saying we will do this thing. But why we have not been able to do this thing? Because the political opposition was so strong. And why was political opposition so strong? Because the Green Revolution, and before that the tenancy reforms, which we in India called as the land reforms somehow, benefited a certain section of the society, which became quite powerful in the rural economy, right? So especially when we see the Punjab and Haryana and Western UP and so on. And these were the new elites in the countryside. They benefited. They controlled the rural economy, so they controlled the banks, the vote banks in the villages. And no political party had the guts to go against these people. This is as simple as that. This is a political economy question, because the control over cooperative markets, the control over the mandis, the control over the cooperative banks is the key to the control over the votes in the countryside. This is how our Sharad Pawar rules. This is how Akalis rule in Punjab. This is their route to power. So the political opposition was so strong, and that is why no government was able to do that. Now, the opposition was there even to the economic reforms in 1991. The opposition was coming from organized unions, and most importantly, there was opposition from the big industry houses in India. So all your Godrejs and all those Tatas and all, they all opposed the economic reforms of 91. But we could do that because they were not the electoral people. I mean, they did not carry any electoral weight. But here in this case, to go against, or at least uh, fight against this perception that you are anti-Kisan, because somehow in this country the Kisans are glorified, just like they are the gods on earth. So it is a very political. It was a very difficult thing politically, but I think it must be done, and it has been done. But still, you see, the government is not willing to leave its arbitrary powers. So in UP recently, the orders have been given to the district magistrate to keep a check on the prices. Who is the district magistrate to keep a check on the prices? I don't understand. We are basically asking him to use these provisions under Essential Commodities Act. So now you have diluted the act, but you are still not willing to let go of that arbitrary control. So a lot will depend upon the actual implementation of the Farms Bill reforms, whether it's the essential commodities thing, whether it's the contract farming. The contract farming will not work, Sivajyoti, unless and until it is supplemented by very strong legal system. Because trust me, there will be lots of cases of farmers getting duped or taken for a ride by the companies and by the corporates. So we need a very strong judicial system, very strong institutions to regulate it. And the other one is the Mandi Bill. Mandi Bill will also not work if the government retreats from the Sarkari Mandi. So for the private mandis to function, the government mandis have to remain and they have to function, right? Because remember, it's not about the government sector versus private sector, not just in the Sarkari mandis in the agriculture, but whether it's the health or education, which Aasheerwad was talking about. The level of the public sectors sets the minimum or the floor quality of services provided by the private sector. So if there are no proper Sarkari hospitals, there are no proper government hospitals in the country, the private sector will come up with a little bit better service and charge you 10 times more. So same is true even for the Farms Bill. So if the government mandis are working properly, the private mandis will also work properly. But the moment they will see there's no option for the farmers to go anywhere, we will see that things will deteriorate. But overall, Farms Bill was a great thing. Remember, what we have done is historic, because Essential Commodities Act has its root in the pre-independence era, basically to mobilize the Indian resources for the World War II. The price control has its roots in the Alauddin Khilji's market control policies to benefit the Turkish settlers in Delhi and Garrison Town at the cost of the peasantry. And even our APMC had its roots in the British era rules of the 19th century, whose sole aim was to make sure that Indian products, especially your raw materials, are available to the British industry in the UK. So we have done historic change, and this is a great thing. But we need to be careful how we go forward, because things can still go wrong if the government does not play an active role still.
Could you have something to add to it? I mean, what can we say an effect on farm incomes in, say, the short period 2020 to 2022 of this bill? Yeah, can you hear me?
You are asking me?
Aasheerwad, can you hear me?
I can't hear you clearly.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Please tell me.
Yeah, so I was just asking your opinion about the matter. Do you think it will have an immediate impact on farm incomes, say, for example, something visible in the near term?
See, I don't think so. It will take some time, and I completely agree to what Abhinav was saying. See, a lot of things will depend on how this is implemented, and immediately, I don't think it is going to. You'll have to wait at least for 6-7 years to for income to increase. Near term, I don't see any increase in farmers' income. But it was a much needed change, as he's saying that it is a historic change, it's a good change. But if you have to be patient, you have to be very careful in its implementation, and finally you'll see the result.
Thanks, Aasheerwad. So we are actually running out of time. So the last issue we must absolutely discuss is the labor market. So this economists in this country have for a long period of time talked about labor reforms. I believe there was a labor reform commission which was formed sometimes in all the way back in 2002. This was supposed to be something called the second wave of reforms, which never came. So now we do have the labor code. So my question, to both of you, so what do you think is the outcome of the labor code? Is it a reform or is it just rearranging of the laws? I mean, the labor code, as I see it, I don't see any fundamental, as a lawyer, I don't see any fundamental departure from the original labor laws. Is it a beginning of a labor reform? Is it a labor reform by itself? Or is it just, reorganizing the law, just or reorganizing the cards again? What do you think, Abhinav?
I think you have already described it very well. So these labor codes are more of reorganizing the existing law and simplifying them. No, we have given some concession like increasing the limit of to be classified as the small and medium industry, and we have increased the number of people employed before certain laws can apply to you. But it's true that the labor laws which were there before this labor code, they were quite chaotic, they were quite arbitrary, and the threshold of the implementation of certain laws was too small, too low, right? So a small industry employing 100 to 100 people cannot necessarily so rich that it can provide all those facilities that you used to ask for. But as I've said before, we are only focused on the labor reforms when majority of your people do not even work in the formal sector. Now, of course, on paper, we have written that this will be applicable to all the people, not just the formal sector employees, but who's going to implement it? Who's going to monitor it? So its impact will not be seen immediately. The long-term trajectory has to promote manufacturing so that you have more people coming into under the scanner, in the sense that if it's a manufacturing unit, a proper registered manufacturing unit, then you will have lots of data collection, you will have the better implementation of the laws. And that is why Subhajyoti, the first thing India should do going forward, one of the reforms which India should do is to do an NRC, right? A National Register of Citizens is the prerequisite of all the success of all these policies, because you cannot make policies without data. There is no modern country in the world which does not know who citizens are and where do they live. Even Pakistan and Bangladesh have an NRC. In India, we don't have it. So we don't know who is who. And we saw that during the migration crisis. The government had no data of the migrant workers. Why? Because we do not have NRC in this country. The government actually considered transferring money to the accounts of the workers, like the Americans have done it, to give wages to the workers. But then the problem was there was no data on it. So we had to drop that idea. So that is the first thing we need to do going forward when talking about labor reforms. At least have a registry of all the labor class in India, right? And have the migration data so that there's no problem in identifying people for the benefits of the different welfare schemes and also for the implementation of the laws. But again, which I will say that we cannot only look at the labor reforms as in isolation. We need to invest in the labor as well, because no industry is going to invest in a country if your labor is a slave labor, right? So we need to have simple labor laws, properly implemented labor laws, supplemented by good investment and sufficient investment by the state in the labor welfare, including residence and health and education.
Thanks, Abhinav. So Aasheerwad, let me now just ask the same question to you. Do you think that the labor code is enough? It's a beginning, or if you have to suggest a labor reform, where would you start? In fact, I know that you work into the economics of innovation. So if you wish to see an innovation and entrepreneurial economy, What kind of labor laws would you like to see?
First of all, I'll say that it's a beginning for sure. Certain things which are very new in this code is like, they have something related to migrant workers. They have for the first time considered gig workers and platform workers as well in the labor code. So this is a very welcome change. But very at a very fundamental level, in principle, why do we need labor laws? In a labor surplus economy, there is always an understanding that there should be some law to protect it under the assumption that capital has a higher bargaining power than labor. Till this point, everything is all right. But after that, the way labor laws has functioned in our country is contradictory to the basic principle that I told right now. It gave rise to a massive informal sector. Because of that, what happened is you are giving protection to a very small set of people who do actually have a very high bargaining power. And there is a huge chunk of labor in our country which are they are completely unprotected as an outcome of the labor laws which are supposed to protect them. So this is the biggest irony that I can see. But then in this change, they have changed definitions where I expect that informality should reduce. And also, as I told you, that the nature of economy had changed a lot. So it was important to consider platform worker and gig workers, and put some responsibility on the aggregators like Zomato and all. So it is definitely a right step in the future. So, but its effect, obviously, it will take some time to show. But being said everything, it is very important to invest in labor, as Abhinav was saying. You can make laws as weak as possible. You can remove labor law completely out of the picture. But if you do not have skill, it's not going to work. And specifically to the question related to innovation, that's more important. That bit is more important than labor laws. You need to invest in the human capital, and that should start from schooling. And in the last 10 years, or 10, I won't say 10 years, in last almost 20 years, I think school education in our country has deteriorated across the board. It's not a rural or urban phenomenon, it is everywhere. So if you don't do that and you make very easy labor laws, it's not going to work.
Okay, so thank you both our panelists for this excellent session. Thank you for joining us. We hope to see more of you. Each and every one of these issues, innovation, labor law, or the farm bills, are worthy of a session by itself. So now I would once again thank you, and I would request our student, Mr. Pratyush, to give the vote of thanks. Pratyush, you can please switch on your mic.
Thank you, sir. And good evening, everyone. I'm really very honored and lucky to have been given this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks on this special day. Firstly, I would like to thank Professor Abhinav Prakash and Professor Aasheerwad Dwivedi for taking out time from their extremely busy schedule, that too on a Saturday, to deliver this lecture. I must say that it was really very insightful, and I'm sure it broadened the horizons of everyone present here. Further, I would like to thank Professor Subrajyoti Gupta for spearheading the initiative of Sanyog. We are really very indebted to him and the entire conservative society for providing us this opportunity to exchange ideas in an academic and intellectual manner. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the IT department of JGU for making sure that this event runs smoothly. Finally, I would like to thank Dr. C. Rajkumar, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, and Professor Srijit, the Executive Dean of JGLS, for giving us this platform. I would like to thank you all again for making this event a success and wholeheartedly participating in it.
See you again. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Subrajyoti and the students.
Thank you, Subrajyoti. Thank you, students. All the best.
Thank you.